Here we'll talk about the blood flow of the heart. Now that we have learned the name of the structures, we'll see how the heart works to circulate the blood through the whole body. So we'll start with the vena cava. And blood, deoxygenated blood, comes from the lower extremities and from your abdominal cavity and pulmonary cavity, and the blood goes up towards the brain, and also blood coming from the lungs or the heart or the brain will come down this way, getting to the atrium, and after it gets into the atrium contracts and pushes this blood down to the ventricle. So deoxygenated blood comes from the lower extremities and from the lungs and brain, we have only one, and then into the atria and down to the ventricle. After the blood is down to the ventricle contracts and the blood is pushed into the pulmonary artery. After the blood is pushed into the pulmonary artery, this blood divides and goes into the right and left pulmonary artery to the lungs, where the blood is recycled in the capillaries. It's really, really small one-layer tubes where oxygen can be, carbon dioxide can be exchanged for oxygen. Then that blood comes back to the heart, and now that it became oxygenated, it comes in. This would be one lung right here. It looks more like a kidney, but that's okay. This is one of the lungs, and this is like the other lung. And the oxygenated blood will come in and get into both of the pulmonary veins. And this one right here doesn't mean that the oxygenated blood is getting here on the right side. It goes behind the heart and comes in to the atrium. So after it comes into the atrium squeezes, it contracts. It's called systole. And as it contracts, it pushes the heart down, the blood down the ventricles. And from the ventricles, after they contract, they go under systole, it will push the heart to the aorta. So one thing that happens, at the same time that this atrium is contracting, the right one is contracting, the left one is contracting also. So at the same time this blood is getting pushed into the ventricle, so is the other one. So everything happens at the same time. Does that make sense? So the same thing that's happening here has to happen on the other side too. Now we'll go through the same path, but we'll add the valves into it, and then we can make an outline of what we have just talked about. So blood, deoxygenated blood, on the right side of the body, and here would be the left. On the right side of the body, goes up, passes through the inferior vena cava to the atrium. And blood comes from the brain, and the lungs that have been used, that are deoxygenated, comes into the superior vena cava, into the atrium. The atrium will contract, and it will push the blood down to the ventricle through the tricuspid valve. After the ventricle contracts, the blood will be pushed to the pulmonary artery through the pulmonary valve into the right and left pulmonary arteries to the lung to be recycled. After the blood is recycled, the blood is pushed towards the pulmonary veins, and the pulmonary veins will deliver this blood into the left atrium that will pass through the bicuspid valve into the ventricles and up towards the aorta through the aortic valve. So after this blood passes through the aorta, it goes through the aortic arch, and you don't have to know that for your exam what this is called. Blood also leaves right here, and it goes up to the brain and all those structures above the heart. And then the rest of the blood goes down towards the body, and it delivers oxygen everywhere in the body. So one way that's good to remember the path of the heart is we can use the letter R for receive. So the right side of the body receives the blood, and the left side of the heart, now I like to refer to the blood instead of the heart, but I'll say that on the left side of the heart is where the blood leaves the heart. So the heart receives blood on the right side, and the blood leaves the heart on the left side. That's a good way to remember and not get it confused. So now I'll outline all of this in words, and so that's easier for you to study later without, if you don't have a picture. So we'll start with vena cava. So the blood comes in from the superior and inferior vena cava. It goes to the right atrium, passes through a valve. Which one? Tricuspid valve, which is on the right side of the heart, and it goes into the ventricle, the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, it passes through the pulmonary valve, and it goes into the pulmonary artery. And it's good to refer to deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood. Some people say that veins carry only deoxygenated blood and arteries carries only oxygenated blood, but that's not necessarily true. There's an exception to that. So instead of even using this analogy, notice that here is a vena cava, but we have veins, right? That they push the blood up. And since we're talking about this, I'll explain something. Lower extremity veins, since the blood is going against gravity, they have one-way valves. So as the blood is pushed upwards, it cannot come back because the valve will hold the blood up. So this is a vein in the lower extremity. But this is a vein, right? So there's exceptions. So what's good to say is blood that goes towards the heart and the lungs to be recycled are deoxygenated. Blood who comes from the lungs towards the body is deoxygenated blood. So don't say that veins carry only deoxygenated blood, because it's not true. The pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood, and the aorta, which is an artery, carries oxygenated blood, but it can always can also carry deoxygenated blood, like up here. Okay, so let's see here. Let's go back to our outline. So from the pulmonary arteries, it goes to the lungs for gas exchange. So it'll give away CO2 and it wants O2 back. And then from there, it goes to the pulmonary veins. And from the pulmonary veins, it gets into the left atrium. From the left atrium, it passes to the bicuspid valve. Then from the atrium to the ventricles, it's only one. And then from the ventricle, it goes to the aorta. And when it goes from the ventricle through to the aorta, it passes through the aortic valve. And then from the aorta, it goes to the body. So here we'll say to body, and here up on the vena cava we'll say from the body. So from the body to the body. And here's the outline, and that should help you to understand this concept better without having to memorize so much. Try to write this on your own by looking at the heart.